right, everybody, welcome back. This is going to be a fun one. This is a little bit nerdy. It's a little bit about the science and the inner workings behind the scenes of what's happening in the blockchain industry and how energy is attached to it. Everybody wants to know about the use and the consumption of energy from a blockchain's perspective. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot in the news about it. And so we just wanted to take a little bit of time, not from a developer's perspective, but from a designer's perspective, and digest what could seem like a really complex situation down hopefully to a really quick video where we can pass on knowledge to you as efficiently as possible. Take this up, do what you want with it, let us know if you've got better solutions. We're always interested. So this isn't necessarily a judgment call. This is trying to provide some of the facts and then obviously how that works into Medium's thinking about these things. So essentially, the way that a blockchain actually works is that it's a decentralized network. So rather than having a central cluster of machines or computers or servers in a location, it's decentralized. So these servers or computers can be anywhere in the world, anywhere in the globe, and they're just a node, right? They're just a piece of an overall system. Well, really the thing that drives energy use in this space is a consensus mechanism. How do now that the information has been placed evenly on all these other computers and all these other databases, well, how do they come together and they actually have a way of verifying and validating, official transactions, and how do they keep, hackers at bay? How do they use cryptography to build really trusted environments that essentially add security to the whole open source network and consensus? And so in this video, we're going to talk about a few different consensus mechanisms and how they relate to the amount of energy that's being used right now in the NFT space or in the blockchain space. So hopefully we're giving you a bunch of information here from a designer's perspective. And, this is not meant to be thorough. These are all rabbit holes that you can go down, but just trying to do a really quick overview to spread as much knowledge as possible about the topic. All right. So once you realize that, its consensus is really, there's different methods of consensus, and the energy use is directly attributed to the different type of consensus. And so we wanted to go ahead and highlight some of those and talk about some of those systems that are attached to it, and not get into the weeds, but just give the designers a little bit of a background. If you're thinking about NFTs, if you're thinking about blockchain use, everybody knows that we're heavy in this space. We're running a multi-blockchain solution, so we're really technology agnostic. And we're really just trying to find the best technologies to bring into our system and to grant access to, the world's best creatives. And so we always want to make sure that we're making appropriate decisions. And in the future, Medium itself will be decentralized. So therefore, right now we're making the best decisions we can, but we'll have some governance models in the future for the creatives and the practitioners in the space to actually influence some of these decisions moving forward. So let's go all the way back to 2008. Really, everybody, I think by now has heard of blockchain, has heard of Bitcoin. That's just a blockchain-enabled cryptocurrency. So really, all you need to know is that cryptography is a way of essentially encrypting files and placing them, smart contracts on an immutable ledger. Okay, so once things actually happen, they actually go on to the blockchain, right? And so that secure mechanism is essentially cryptography. And Bitcoin in 2008, basically what they did was they were applying that technology to a currency, right? And so everybody wonders what an NFT is. We always say it's a non-fungible token. Well, that's opposed to a fungible application. So a dollar bill, right, or a Bitcoin, it's not unique. You can always get one that's exactly the same and has no less or more value than the one that you lost or the one that you spent, right? So that's very opposite than a one-of-one piece of artwork that once it's gone, if it burnt, it would never, it would never exist again in the world. And so The idea there is the key innovation was really not the cryptography part of it, but the consensus mechanism. And so what the what the Satoshi and Cyberpunks or whoever think built Bitcoin, um, you know their real innovation was the consensus mechanism, and that's what today is known as proof of work. So PoW, proof of work, and this is how you can start attaching the consensus mechanism back to the question of energy. So under this situation, proof of work is essentially a mining system, right? So you've got to think that people are behind the scenes having computers or people or who whatever server, like there's energy used to run this system. But interestingly enough, the majority of the energy being used within this Bitcoin proof of work consensus model is actually designed into it. It's designed to be energy intensive. Not necessarily to be energy intensive on its own, but really these computers are essentially solving really computationally complex problems, and that's by design. And so once you are able to, if you have the horsepower, if you have the computational power to drive these really complex systems, well then great, then you earn the right to be able to actually transact blocks and to unlock obviously funds for you. And so the idea there is that if you're pushing computational power, then it really starts to lower the risk of hacks, and it adds a security feature because the risk reward from a hacking perspective is so minimal, because it's just going to just take so much computational power to even try to hack. And so the energy use was actually designed into it, and the really great thing is that it works. Is that what was designed, the system that was set up, and the proof of work as security to this open source system actually works. The problem, though, is that it actually results in real world energy. So you got to think that the hard part about calculating the financials or how much energy use is actually going into it is that this is a completely decentralized system. It could be based on, the carbon footprint could be based on, what the local energy source is for a particular area where a particular computer is set up, and that particular computer has its own set of parameters for energy use versus other computers. And so you start going down the rabbit hole of calculating these things, and we'll put a link in here, but there's a really good article. It takes kind of the academic and the scholarly approach to it, and they came up with some actual really cool predictions of cost and higher and lower limits. But what we're wanting to do at Medium is we're wanting to build an actual system that tracks the use of an NFT over its lifespan, right? And so we're always innovating in this space to ultimately, if we know, or at least we think there's a problem, the first thing to do is investigate it, find out what that cause is. Hopefully here we're talking about that cause, and then we can start talking about resolutions. So that's really cool. Proof of work is really cool, and it led off and kind of kicked off this whole new phase of computer innovation around cryptography, but it obviously has its drawback. There's alternate ways of consensus, and we'll talk about two more. There's one called proof of stake, right? Instead of proof of work showing that you've got all this computational power, and actually the majority of that energy goes to solving these computational problems that aren't actually doing the transacting. And so really, all that computational power is not really solving a whole lot in the world. So there's some interesting conversations around maybe how you could tweak, that computational problem to actually have real world benefit, so that energy is not just going to the rights to basically transact blocks. So in this one, proof of stake, right? So this is Bitcoin, this is Ethereum, right? They were all proof of work. Ethereum, is talking about, and I don't know exactly how far along they are in the process, about moving to a proof of stake model. Because they know that there's extreme energy use already built in and baked into this process. And so proof of stake actually think, that you have a stake in something. So you've got proof of of your stake in something. And that's a consensus mechanism that's built around the amount of cryptocurrency that you have kind of stashed or locked away for this cause. And that gives you then the right to mint, blocks and to actually create those transactions. So here it was computational power that was driving the consensus mechanism. Here it's really financial power, right? If you've got the capital, then you basically earn the right. And this is a better model in terms of energy use, but it's still pretty wild in terms of its energy use, right? So the one that we actually prefer over here is a model called proof of authority, PoA. And from a PoA's perspective, you are, it's a different type of system because this is a permissioned blockchain. These two models are a permissionless blockchain, meaning that like any miner could be anyone, right? So it's a really open system. Anybody, if you have the money and the horsepower computationally, you can be in. Cool. But this one, this is kind of why they call that a public and they call this private. But really think that this is how industries are built. The industries are not really going to be built over here as so much over here. And this is really great because this is actually where you start to get to the energy savings and orders of magnitude less than what you're hearing about over here with Ethereum and Bitcoin and all of those. So in a proof of authority model, you're essentially having it's a bit more of a controlled network. It's not purely open source. It's not permissionless. This is permissioned. And so you can really start to see why like the public sector and industry sectors are really going to prefer this model because there's so many more guarantees that you can do from like layering businesses and it's so much more secure from essentially things like Hyperledger or Quorum. We like to play the follow back game, follow the money, right? And you start to go, okay, well, we know where the money, we know Vitalik and Ethereum, is that decentralized if it's one person that owns the system and can make a unilateral decision. Over here, think that like who owns it? Well, really, Hyperledger was started by a nonprofit, the Linux Foundation. And you start looking at all these great industry people that are behind the scenes and contributed to the Linux Foundation and what their goals are. It's still an open source blockchain, but essentially it's being run by a nonprofit rather than like a really unique individual. And so the great thing is that you can start to see here, there's a simple graph that we'll have the link to, but essentially you start looking at the order of magnitude and what the consensus mechanisms actually do, in terms of energy consumption. And so if you think over here, these are obviously orders of magnitude per transaction. Over here, if you just have a basic server, okay, great. And then you have a centralized model, so that's a cluster of servers, right? Privately owned. And then you've got PoA, PoS, and PoW. So you've got proof of authority, proof of stake, and proof of work. And you can see right now, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, all of these were on this proof of work model. And so they were purposely, designed, the system was purposely designed to actually use the energy use, the high energy use as a security feature. And it works great. Ethereum wants to move, so there's others that are on the proof of stake model, but really Medium, we're technology agnostic, so we can support any of these. But essentially, obviously our preference is the PoA model where because Medium itself will become decentralized, then it takes the whole verbiage, as we talked about in the other video, it takes the whole verbiage out of what's private or what's public, what's private. And we really think that it's the organizational model that drives that, not necessarily who the people are behind the blockchain. And so obviously if we took what's a private thing with Linux and made it public via decentralization of Medium, then we see that as a decentralized model and a community-run blockchain. So hopefully this starts to give you a little bit of idea and scratch the surface of how energy use is tied to cryptocurrency or to blockchain or NFTs, so on and so forth. There's a lot more to come. We could probably talk for days on this, but go ahead and send comments to us and let us know what you want us to cover next. All right, take care. Thanks. Bye.